Good morning. This is Penal the Black Pen. As I was driving this morning, something basically was bugging me, and I was thinking about it. So I figured I'd share it with you. It's some of the insights that I may have in the clothing industry in Johannesburg. I meet a lot of entrepreneurs every day who claim that they're in clothing, that they make clothes, that they want to create brands and be unique, etc., etc. And I've learned a bit. I invested in a couple of clothing ventures in the past couple of years. I also had the opportunity to visit China and Vietnam to basically understand how the places that basically make the most clothing in the world operate. The first thing that I want to say is I'm from Newcastle. I grew up there. Newcastle's got a very healthy textiles industry. We've got a very big Taiwanese community there that owns factories. And those guys basically make mostly school uniform, but a whole lot of other clothing that gets sent out throughout South Africa. That's the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing I wanted to say is, having lived in Johannesburg, I grew to realize that there are a lot of people that sew clothing, especially in the CBD. You may not realize it, but you walk past buildings every day that have lots and lots of sewing machines and people that are working 24 hours a day. There's literally one building that I know specifically close to the Maboneng precinct, where it's one floor. It's got something like 300 sewing machines. You rent a sewing machine. You have access 24 hours, and people are constantly making clothing there. There's another place around Ellis Park that I had the privilege of visiting because I needed some stuff there. I met the Indian owner there, and what I learned, which is one of the hacks that I'm sharing with you today, is they make clothing for a lot of the big retailers in our country. They make the clothing locally. They source the materials from overseas, but they make the clothing locally. And after they've made it, they put tags of "made in China" on the clothing. That blew my fucking mind when I found out about it. And I asked, but if it's proudly South African, why don't you just put "made in South Africa"? Because you're creating jobs and it's something big. And what this guy told me is that people work with perception. What happens when you make something and you say "made in China," people already assume that it must be cheaper. And the suppliers that they work with prefer seeing that, because to them they feel like they're making a good deal. As an example, what I also learned when I was in China is that a lot of the Chinese factories is such a misnomer. When I went to visit China, I was expecting these big, huge buildings of what a factory is. And what I found, they were literally garage spaces where in a very small space, you've got something like 10 people who are making lots and lots of clothing 24 hours a day and exporting them anywhere in the world. That's the first thing that blew my mind. I thought a factory was something huge, but a factory is literally the size of your garage. They call that a factory. They've got their information on Alibaba online, and you source from them, and you assume they've got this huge factory, and it's literally a garage that's making so much money and so much produce every day. The second hack I got is that a lot of the Chinese material is becoming very expensive. So those guys get their material, get their basic t-shirts, whatever the case may be, from Vietnam these days. China, as globalization becomes bigger, as more and more people import from there, is starting to increase their prices, and it's costing them less now to get some of their basic stuff from Vietnam and then maybe brand it or whatever the case may be from China and then export it. That's the second hack I found, that clothing in Vietnam is actually cheaper than it is in China. The other hack, the other hack that I found was what you call counterfeit goods, fake clothing. The concept of fake clothing is meant to be straightforward. It's meant to be, I make something, when you replicate it, it's a fake because the quality is weaker, the materials you use is inferior. The truth of the matter is that in China and in Vietnam, when these guys talk about counterfeit or fake, there are levels to it. There's obviously, like Louis Vuitton. If you go to taxi ranks, you'll find handbags that sell for 100 Rand, 150 Rand. Those handbags are not Louis Vuitton. They're cheap, they're weak. You can see the material that they use is inferior. But in Vietnam and in China, these guys know how to replicate a Louis Vuitton bag to look exactly like Louis Vuitton. everything. They get the material, they get the branding, the stitching, the everything exactly the same. Up to and including a point where even packaging, those guys can replicate what you see as a Louis Vuitton box or a Louis Vuitton gift bag, or a Louis Vuitton maybe silk lining inside a box, whatever the case may be. Those guys can replicate that to look exactly like Louis Vuitton, put a registered trademark, whatever it is you want to see on the thing that'll make it look exactly like an original. You call this a fake? It is a fake because it's not coming from a verified Louis Vuitton producer, but it's not a fake because it's exactly the same thing. A lot of our celebrities in South Africa source from people who travel overseas, and then those people get them counterfeits that are much cheaper, which look exactly like the real thing. They are counterfeits, but they don't look counterfeit, and even the branding and the packaging looks extremely legit. This hack blew my fucking mind. When I was walking in the streets of Guangzhou, I found out that some of the factories, what they do is when you order something, let's say from South Africa, I have a brand, it's called the 100 Million brand, it's my clothing line. If I'm ordering 50,000 t-shirts from China of the 100 Million brand, those guys realize that there's a market for this t-shirts in South Africa. They tell some of their friends, and these guys start replicating that brand almost exactly as is. They'll price you maybe at 20 Rand a t-shirt, and they'll start replicating either the same quality or slightly inferior for maybe, and then start selling for maybe 15 Rand, which is cheaper. And that's where Nigerian and other guys find out that apparently in Cape Town in South Africa, there's this big t-shirt craze that's going around called the 100 Million brand. So we're making you t-shirts to sell, counterfeit, whatever the case may be there. And they kill the market. Yeah, I'll tell you more when I get a chance. I'm running out of space. Have a great day.